Welcome, everyone, to the Vashon Heritage Museum History Talks. Tonight's presentation is on the Vashon Remembrance Project, More Than Names and Statistics. I'm Elsa Kroonquist, the Executive Director of the museum. And now, Chris, would you like to introduce tonight's presentation and speaker?
Thank you. The intent of the Vashon Remembrance Project is twofold: to combat the forgetting or whitewashing of significant historical and recent atrocities, and to honor the victims of those atrocities by humanizing their lives beyond statistics and names. This is done by researching the individuals displayed in the portraits around Vashon Island and connecting their faces with relatable and very human facts about their lives to inspire reflection. In this presentation, artist West McLean will discuss the project, its inspiration, the necessity of sonder, and the insidious idea of otherism. Now it's my pleasure to introduce West McLean. He is an island artist, designer, and educator. He is the founder of the Vashon Remembrance Project, which created portraits of persons of color killed by law enforcement and coordinated the display of these portraits at island businesses. Welcome, Mr. McLean.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thanks to the Vashon Heritage Museum for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Ralph Rain, who you're hearing in the background right now. Support local artists of color, y'all. My name may or may not be Wes McLean. I'm the founder and artist behind Vashon Remembrance Project. I also have a disclaimer for you. I'm a white guy, in case you couldn't tell. It's one of the ironies of anti-racism that we must identify racially in order to identify our privileges, according to Dr. Kendi. This presentation comes from a place of privilege, as does the entirety of the Vashon Remembrance Project. And I'll talk a little bit about that throughout, but this is an acknowledgement of my status as a cis white male and extrapolations thereof as we go through this. So about the project, if you're not on Vashon or haven't seen some of these, the Vashon Remembrance Project came about last summer in reaction to the protests and the murders of Black people at the hands of law enforcement. These were large paintings that went up around Vashon in storefronts and business windows of individuals who were murdered by police. I wanted their faces and their names to be remembered, and I wanted, their martyrdom to be remembered, and their lives as well, just not their deaths. And that's why each of these paintings had with it a QR code that's scannable with any phone, and you can read some details about the person's life to get to know them a little bit. So we'll start off with Mr. George Floyd. This portrait was up for a minute at the window of the hardware store restaurant in town, and then found a home at Studio Lux. There's also a print on the side of the Heritage Museum. George Perry Floyd Jr. Was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He was raised by his mom in Houston. He played football and basketball in high school. He played varsity as a freshman. He was a big dude. He was the first one of his siblings to attend college. George was heavily involved at the church, local agencies. He helped the poor and the elderly. He delivered meals. He helped young men get jobs. He also took care of his mom after she had a stroke. When he died, he had 5 kids and 2 grandchildren. He was, as most already know, murdered by police in Minneapolis last summer. His death was a catalyst of a major expansion of the Black Lives Matter movement, or I should say, an expansion of the consciousness of the Black Lives Matter movement and its momentum, its acceptance across America. But it had existed before that, since 2013. I was not the first or the last or the best by far to paint a portrait of George. There are murals all over the world which speak to his life, his martyrdom, and certainly everyone had their reasons for painting George, for honoring him, and prompting others to say his name. So I want to take a second and address a question that I get a lot about the project, which is, why did you start the project? And I gave a cringy response to this question to the paper last year about not being able to concentrate, and about how I couldn't concentrate on my work or meditate because of all the news of these murders and riots. And poor little West McLean in his lovely Vashon home can't concentrate. And it's such a privileged quote, which is a microaggression in itself, which I see in hindsight. But that doesn't mean it wasn't my reality at the time. I just didn't probe deep enough into my surface feelings for whatever reason, probably comfort. And the truth is I couldn't concentrate because I was furious and I felt powerless and I felt ashamed. And all I could think to do was paint. And I wanted to be an ally overall. And this is a definition of allyship from the Dismantle Collective, which I love. Ally is not an identity. It is an ongoing and lifelong process that involves a lot of work. It goes on to say, it's a little long, but I'm going to read it. It's cool. A white ally acknowledges the limits of their knowledge about other people's experiences, but doesn't use that as a reason not to think and or act. A white ally does not remain silent, but confronts racism as it comes up daily, but also seeks to deconstruct it institutionally and live in a way that challenges systemic oppression at the risk of experiencing some of that oppression. Being a white ally entails building relationships with both people of color and also with white people in order to challenge them in their thinking about race. White allies don't have it all figured out, but are deeply committed to non-complacency. End quote. Again, this is from Dismantle Collective. If you want to check out more of their work, you can go to their website. There's a lot of good stuff on there. So I had recognized that I had to do something, but I wasn't sure about substantive activism, but I knew that I was witnessing oppression and injustice and straight up white supremacy, and I needed to do something. So I determined to be an accomplice in that fight, to be an ally. But it's a delicate balance to engage in allyship in a way that doesn't do unintentional harm. Pointing back to that answer I gave as to why the Remembrance Project was started, that was a pretty self-serving answer, but I'm learning. And education is the first step, as Dr. Kendi says. Anti-racism, which is essential to allyship, takes education and self-examination. So that's what I'm going for myself and for my family. And this quote by Maya Angelou makes me feel a little better about myself. Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Miss Brianna Taylor. This portrait was hung up at the Vashon in the window of Vashon Pizza, thanks to Natalie Harkins. Brianna Taylor was a trained and certified EMT and first responder. She was also a certified nursing assistant. She worked in the ER. Her friends say that she was the sweetest person they'd ever known. They say Brianna was excited about becoming a nurse, buying a house, getting married, starting a family. She wanted to dance to the song Everything by Mary J. Blige at her wedding. She had a shoe collection, which reminded me of my sister, who also has a shoe collection. She also loved bananas, and her favorite cereal was Fruity Pebbles. These are facts. These are facts provided by Brianna's closest friends, and I feel very humbled and privileged to get to know these facts. And I'm going to tell you why. A major component of the Vashon Remembrance Project is the idea of sonder. The realization that each random passerby has a life as vivid and complex as your own, with their own dreams, fears, wishes, loves, and details that make them who they are. Sonder is realizing the humanity in another person. And this is what I hope that the QR codes and the stories on the website and will do for the individuals in the portraits. I love this picture on the screen. This lady on the left looks a little shifty. This is actually from a memorial to John Lennon, so she's actually getting choked up and not looking shiftily at the guy in the middle who's looking directly into our souls. So, sonder. This video had a big effect on me and was a big influence on the Vashon Remembrance Project and the idea behind the QR codes. it was a big influence early on. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to play about 30 seconds. It's about a 4-minute video, but let's listen to a snippet. This is Tyler Merritt.
Before you call the cops, I just want you to know, the first thing that I did when I woke up this morning was yell at my alarm clock. I hate spiders. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not proud about it. I've done goat yoga. I'm really not proud about that. I can tell you every single word off the NWA Straight Outta Compton album. I can also sing you every single word from Oklahoma. Bananas
Are disgusting. It's true.
I'm a Christian.
Sometimes. So he goes, I absolutely love this video. He goes on to talk about more personal details of his life, his mom, his brothers. He loves basketball and also hockey. It's just a very powerful and moving and simple piece of sonder that has meant a lot to me over the last couple of years. Tyler Merritt. If you want to watch the whole thing, you can Google or go onto YouTube and find Before You Call the Cops. It's a great little video. The opposite of sonder could be, or the antithesis could be, otherism, which is narrowly defining which groups of are full members of society or acting or speaking in ways that dehumanize a group of people. Mexicans are rapists, or illegal immigrants are going to take your job. That's othering. What you see on the screen here is a paraphrased definition from an article penned by Dr. John Powell, a law professor at UC Berkeley, about the danger of us versus them mentality. He says, quote, "Othering is not about liking or disliking someone. It's based on the conscious or unconscious assumption that a certain identified group poses a threat to the favored group," unquote. This is important. Poses a threat, and even a conceptual threat, like an immigrant stealing your job, or a stranger, coming into town, a foreigner even. This is an emotional dog whistle that's used to brand a group as villainous to the other. Not to get too neuroscience-y, but the human amygdala does not differentiate between emotional threat and physical pain. So politicians and the media, whom Dr. Powell here writes are overwhelmingly responsible for othering. They know exactly what they're doing in riling up the fears and stoking the pain of their supporters. Otherism is mental justification to see other races as less than human, and to the white supremacist, that excuses discrimination. That's otherism, and that is why I feel like I need to know Brianna Taylor's favorite cereal is Fruity Pebbles. Charlena Lewis. Some more Ralph Rain for you. Charlena Lewis grew up in Seattle. She dreamed of a better life for her 4 kids, one of whom had Down syndrome. She worked odd jobs, including a barista, which, as everyone knows, is a prerequisite for living in Seattle. And also, she was expecting her 5th child when she was murdered by police who were responding to a mental health wellness check. She was killed in 2017. Thank you to Sarah St. Germain for housing this painting at Sarah's Salon in Vashon. You can now see it up at the VCA installation. I actually learned about Charlena Lewis from a local, Chris, who said that I should read her story and paint her, and I did. I actually have a lot of locals to thank for their support and encouragement. A lot of people opened up their Rolodex, put me in contact with local businesses who wanted to be involved, and that continues to this day. This is to me a great reminder that the community support you may be looking for as an ally is here. And the media shows us these crazy conspiracy spouting white supremacist violent people, but we must remember that the number of good people far outnumber brainwashed racist extremists. Many just need to feel empowered to educate themselves and get involved. And I hope that this project, this talk does that in some tiny way. This is a good time to mention that I am not mansplaining or white-splaining or taking credit for many of the ideas or concepts about which I'm speaking. Much smarter people than I have written books or articles on these topics. These are just a few of the people of color whose works you can buy to support them and read on your own for more analysis. None of us non-people of color would be properly educated about the injustices and struggles without their work, their research, and frankly, their magnanimous decision to share it with us. It must be noted that in every recent case and in all historical cases, the knowledge that has led me to become an aspiring anti-racist has come from people of color, and I'm grateful for that. And I could not acknowledge that if I didn't acknowledge the fact that I am a white person. As an example, I try to remain anonymous throughout most portions of this project. That's why I'm not on camera. West McLean's not my name. A lot of people don't know who I am. I don't sell pieces. I don't accept donations that aren't turned over to King County Equity Fund because I don't want any personal recognition as an artist from the loss of BIPOC lives. And it would be morally reprehensible to make any money off of it because, as we all know, that would be exploitation. Always check your reasons, check your sources, learn from academics, authors, leaders of color who share their wisdom. Check your intentions as an ally or as an activist. This portrait of Tamir Rice was housed at Urban Bloom in Vashon. Thank you to Kara. Tamir Elijah Rice attended 6th grade at Marion Seltzer Elementary in Cleveland. His teachers all said that he was quick to smile. He loved to swim and draw and play basketball. He talked a lot of smack on the basketball court, as most 12-year-olds probably do. He would often hum to himself when he was deep in thought or tap out rhythms with his hands. This is my favorite story about him. I read that his teacher said he and a girl in his class clearly had a crush on each other and, quote, they would just gleam at each other and it was like, oh boy, end quote. It's a great quote. At some point, reality and history have to be acknowledged within the sonder. And this is that point. So I suppose this is where a trigger warning might go. Tamir Rice, 12 years old, was playing with a toy gun near a park in Cleveland when he was shot to death by police 2 seconds after the police arrived on the scene. Dashcam footage showed that the police car had not stopped rolling when he was shot in the belly. The dispatcher who radioed the report of Tamir did not tell the responding officer that the caller said the gun is probably fake and he's probably a juvenile more than once. Tamir was shot within 2 seconds of police arriving on the scene for playing with a toy gun. Police were not charged with Tamir's murder. The city paid out a wrongful death suit in the amount of $6 million. And as is all too often the case, immediately after he was killed, police, media, and others undertook a crusade of victim blaming against this 12-year-old boy. These headlines tell a bit of the story. The worst, I think, is from Bloomberg on the right, how psychology explains the Tamir Rice shooting. It's no stretch of the imagination that many people read that as how psychology excuses the Tamir Rice shooting. The byline's correct, though, if you can read that small type. People attach violent stereotypes to images of Black boys as young as 5 years old. And this is called the adultification of Black children, and it's absolutely horrendous. The same thing happened to Trayvon Martin. He was a 17-year-old boy in Florida. This portrait could be seen in the window of Voice of Vashon, and it's now at the VCA. Trayvon was a typical teenager. He loved video games and sports and texting his girlfriend. His teachers remembered him as sweet and respectful, and he went to a special high school for aviation. He wanted to learn to fly and fix airplanes. Trayvon was killed by a racist community watch member who then abhorrently tried to profit on the young man's death by soliciting donations from other racists online and selling the gun that killed Trayvon. And then the media and racist trolls piled on with the victim blaming and the vilification. They found out that Trayvon was suspended from school once, or that he had smoked weed in the past. They dug and they doxed and they harassed and they sullied the name of a kid. And here's why. The following is an excerpt from an article in the Miami Herald written by Leonard Pitts Jr. 5 years after Trayvon was murdered. Quote, "They seized upon his suspension from school. For them, it proved not that he was an ordinary boy who needed and was receiving the guidance of two loving parents. No, it proved that he was not, could not ever be innocent. Trayvon was no angel," they would announce triumphantly. 5 years ago, a black boy was shot for nothing, and many Americans made him a blank screen upon which they projected their racialized stereotypes and fears. They could not allow him to be a harmless child walking home. No, they needed his guilt. They knew what it proved if Trayvon Martin was innocent, namely that America was anything but.
I see way too much now. Gotta turn it all around somehow.
The term victim blaming is aptly used in a lot of terrible situations. It's rampant in cases of sexual assault or domestic abuse, especially. The term was actually coined by psychologist William Ryan in 1971 in the book Blaming the Victim that you see here. In that book, he describes victim blaming as, quote, "an ideology used to justify racism and social injustice against Black people in the United States." It's truly remarkable that the term victim blaming was coined as a direct response to racism. It's remarkable, but not surprising, unfortunately. I dealt with some victim blaming in some of the portraits I put up. Ora Rosser comes to mind. She was, her portrait was put up at the Vashon United Methodist Church. I tend not to read or respond to online comments, but I recall a response on social media to this portrait in particular, saying that she was not, quote, deserving of a portrait, or that someone else may have been more deserving of this kind of recognition due to her past troubles with the law or with drug use. And the poster went on to copy a whole background check of information on Ora as validation of this opinion, which I entirely reject. Especially because at the time of her death, Ora, who was a mother of three, was seeking treatment for substance abuse and mental health, seeking treatment, getting help. And even if she wasn't, the police are not supposed to murder citizens. They're not executioners. The Ann Arbor police officers who killed her were responding to a mental health and wellness check. And this happens much too frequently. I mean, at all is too frequently. But everyone knows there's an enormous disparity in the availability and quality of mental health resources for people of color in the U.S. They have less access. They're less likely to seek mental health supports due to a number of reasons: lack of funds, lack of adequate coverage, stigma, distrust of state systems. Understandably, the list goes on. There is some good news in this vein that has been on the news lately. The reallocation of some law enforcement budgets, reallocation, not defunding, to social workers and trained mental health professionals has shown a lot of promise in not getting people murdered or arrested. Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon has been successful for several years. Recently, the STAR program in Denver sent mental health professionals instead of police to hundreds of 911 calls and has not resulted in a single arrest or murder, for that matter, in any of those responses since the program took effect. I think it's been going for about 6 months. This is not defunding the police, quote unquote. This is allocation of budget items to better serve the public and protect citizens. Michael Brown was an avid video gamer, played Xbox with his friends. Relatable. He also liked to rap. He would often make up verses about himself and his friends and whatever they were doing. He was supposed to start college 2 days after he was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. There is virulent white supremacist victim blaming in the case of Michael Brown, saying that he rushed Officer Wilson before Officer Wilson shot him 6 times. But I am loath to trust the law enforcement system, specifically in this case. I waited for quite a while to paint Michael Brown. I knew I would. I just didn't know how to process or present the story that would go along with it. Because to me, the story of Michael Brown is inextricable from the story of the city of Ferguson itself, which is a case study in systemic racism. I'm not going to go into details. It would take far too long. I'm actually producing a short documentary about this that I hope will come out soon, with an amazing young voice talent on the island, Savannah Butcher. A follow-up Department of Justice report after Michael Brown was killed found rampant racism and discrimination throughout the entire local government of Ferguson, Missouri. It's truly mind-blowing. Harassing Black citizens, levying frivolous fines, trumped-up arrests, debtor's prison, ticket stacking. It's absolutely horrific, the things that the city of Ferguson did to citizens. But then, in 2017, 4 racist garden gnomes in a trench coat, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, called into question his own Department of Justice Civil Rights Division over this report. And he used that old nugget bad apples, the tried and true excuse. The racism seen in Ferguson is not emblematic of the U.S. criminal justice system, etc., etc. Credit where it's due. I learned about this insane situation in Ferguson from Matthew Horace's excellent book, The Black and the Blue, which examines racism and law enforcement. Horace is a decorated former cop himself. Highly recommend this book, and it's available at the King County Library. So Jeff Sessions' distortions of the Department of Justice report is blatant racist revisionism. White supremacy wants people to think that racism is not an issue, that victims have themselves to blame, like the victim blaming we've been discussing. They want the public to focus on black crime as the real problem. They say the past is not worth examining, especially where racism, discrimination, or heaven forbid, slavery are concerned, because that would cause more division, or it would lead down the road to the dreaded cancel culture, which we'll talk about. White supremacists want to discredit Black history and Black historical figures, like Fred Hampton. There is a movie about Fred Hampton coming out tomorrow, which I'm very excited to watch. The title, I'm blanking on the title. Judas and the Black Messiah. I think it's going to be on HBO. Fred Hampton was a community activist and organizer in the Black Panther Party who was targeted, surveilled, and murdered by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department. He was a rising member of the Black Panther Party, which, contrary to white supremacist revisionism, was concerned with community safety, self-defense, ending gang violence, and feeding hungry kids. These are facts. Fred Hampton bartered a truce between the 3 most violent gangs in Chicago at the time. He started a program to feed kids before they went to school in the morning. These are facts. And as part of COINTELPRO, toad-faced bigot J. Edgar Hoover was threatened by Black people organizing and feeling empowered. So Fred Hampton was 21 years old when he was murdered in his bed after being drugged by an FBI informant. These are facts. White supremacists want to believe that these things are made up, that the experiences of Black people aren't valid, All of these things are true and verifiable and historically accurate. As a millennial, coming of age in the 90s, I learned about Fred Hampton from Zach De La Roca.
So now I'm rolling down Rodeo with the shotgun. People ain't seen a brown skin man since they grandparents bought one. And when the sisters stick the shot, well, suckers get romantic. They ain't gonna take us captain like they did my man Fred Hampton, so we laughing. Still clocking took for a sweat.
Gets me every time. Credit where it's due, and another reason to support Black artists. This song, Down Rodeo, introduced me to Fred Hampton. I heard the lyrics. I had to know who Fred Hampton was, so I was introduced to some Black history. Yet another example of learning about Black historical figures from Black artists. There could be an entire show on historical Black storytelling from popular music. KRS-One alone would take up an hour, so let's make that happen. I forget where I was going with this. Oh yeah, support artists of color. Let's talk about 1619. Speaking of racist attempts to discredit history, the 1619 Project is a feature from the New York Times, created and produced by a Black woman, Nicole Hannah Jones. Quote, the 1619 Project is an ongoing initiative from the New York Times Magazine that began in 2019, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. It aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative, unquote. If you haven't listened to it, it's an amazing and thought-provoking piece of journalism that immediately rose the hackles of white supremacists who attempted to discredit the entire project. There was a right-wing push to ban the use of 1619 education materials in schools, which actually just failed in Arkansas on Tuesday, by the way. And in direct response to 1619, the former president commissioned a conservative Texas think tank to create and issue the 1776 report, many portions of which were lifted from a 2018 opinion piece by one of its authors. I thought it was 2008 opinion piece. I'm going to check on that. I'll let you know. A favorite tactic of white supremacists is soliciting people of color who deride historical works, like conservative Reaganite Robert Woodson, who was an architect of the 1776 campaign to directly counter the 1619 Project. This, according to white supremacists, shows that if all Black people don't agree on the historical accuracy of 1619, it calls into question the entire validity of so-called Black history. It is a racist trope to assume that Black culture or Black history is a monolith. Black people can have conservative views, liberal views, revolutionary views, but when a source is singled out and attributed as the voice of Black people, that's racist oppression. And that's the same idea as dehumanization. A monolithic group is not the same as a human being. And the Remembrance Project asks people specifically to think about the individual. Don't forget about the Fruity Pebbles. Speaking of Robert Woodson, this guy, he is a big proponent of pushing the racist idea of Black on Black crime, which is a go-to argument meant to distract from the from the problem of police killing. There's a great piece, if you're interested in reading up on Mr. Woodson, there's a great piece in the Marshall Project by Vesla Weaver about Woodson, if you want to learn more about his promising past and how he was, let's say, co-opted by the right. This tweet from Woodson, however, is also misleading for saying unarmed blacks. For example, Darian Hunt was murdered by Utah police in 2014 when he was walking with a replica samurai sword. Darian was a cosplayer. If you don't know what that is, that's people who dress up as characters from pop culture and they go to conventions cosplaying. He was dressed up as a popular anime samurai when he was killed. Darian also loved camping. He chaperoned for Boy Scout camping trips. This portrait was at Gather and then at the Cone Hastings Gallery. Thank you to both of those. An autopsy showed that Darian was shot multiple times in the back. Because Darian had a samurai sword, he was considered armed, of course, and as if this somehow excuses his death. It's in quite a few headlines. Armed black man shot. He was an armed black man shot by police to white supremacist revisionists. Let's talk about cancel culture. I saw a great post the other day that said white supremacy is the ultimate cancel culture, and that's absolutely true, because it pretends that certain elements of history either didn't happen or are ignored because of the fundamental countrywide reckoning that would need to occur. For example, we have a national monument to a man who owned 600 slaves. Thomas Jefferson repeatedly raped and impregnated one of those slaves, Sally Hemings, starting when she was 14 years old. His family home at Monticello is a National Historic Landmark. He was a pedophile and a white supremacist and a philanderer and a rapist. These are not disputed facts. And he's continually lauded as one of the founding fathers. This monster is on our currency. What would it mean to reckon with Thomas Jefferson? What would so-called cancel culture, which any honest person calls accountability, what would accountability do to Jefferson's lechery and rape? Removing that memorial, for one thing, maybe raising Monticello, decirculating nickels, and also coming to terms with the fact that a man who wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness and countless other sacred American platitudes should be known first as a debased rapist pedophile and second as a so-called founding father. So, in case you weren't disgusted enough, there are many, many revisionist books that pretend that Sally Hemings liked it, that she was asking for it, that they were in love. Thomas Jefferson was a pedophile, and he is on our currency. Hey, speaking of currency, it's great that they want to put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill to replace Andrew Jackson, who contributed so fervently to the genocide of Native Americans that his contemporaries called him the Indian killer. That's a nice step, putting Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, but it's performative. And there are people campaigning against even that performative step because it might diminish, or in their words, cancel, a guy called the Indian killer. So if anyone thinks that the constant invocation of cancel culture isn't 100% used to both insulate white supremacy and attack Black history, well, you should talk to my friends at the North Ogden, Utah School District, who recently thought it would be okay to let students opt out of Black History Month activities. Who thought this would be okay? I actually read yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, that this was overturned because the rest of America was like, hey, North Ogden School District, that's racist. With this story, though, even though it was overturned, we cannot dismiss the fact that someone thought this was completely reasonable. Administrators, school officials, parents had meetings to discuss whether or not removing Black history education was okay. The idea of opting out of Black History Month is assuming that Black history is not American history, which is quintessential othering. And this isn't just grade school. Banning diversity training because it's divisive, and the former Orange president had the nerve to call this executive order combating race and sex stereotyping. Thank God this was also widely rejected. Here's a little beacon of light for this topic. Here's what the whitehouse.gov shows when you search for that executive order. So that's nice. But again, there were countless executive level government officials who thought this was a good idea, that white supremacist revisionism is totally fine, but it is a systemic problem. a widespread systemic institutional problem. And if cancel culture wasn't so intrinsic to our system as white supremacists need it to be, we wouldn't need Black History Month, because Black history is American history. I'm clapping every time I say that. This voluntary exclusion of BIPOC history by predominantly white education legislators and textbook writers is nothing new. Every generation that passes through schools without learning accurate American history is being lied to by omission. I learned about the Plymouth Rock and a whitewashed version of the first Thanksgiving, but I never learned about the Trail of Tears. I never learned about Black Wall Street, about the Tulsa Massacre. I memorized the Gettysburg Address, and I learned that Lincoln freed the slaves. I knew nothing of Reconstruction, or that the first Black senators after the Civil War, or the fact that President Andrew Johnson, following Lincoln, failed Black America so spectacularly in postbellum South that the Klan ruled half the country and erased any progress for Black people. I didn't learn any of this in compulsory schooling. And some might argue, well, there's simply too much history. Not everybody can learn everything in American history.
Okay, that's fair. But here's a more relatable example for the pre-Rage Against the Machine generation. Did you guys hear about this thing at Kent State? The Kent State Massacre, May 4th, 1970. Students at Kent State University were protesting the war in Vietnam, or the expansion into Cambodia. The National Guard showed up and fired into a crowd and killed 4 students. This image here won photographer John Philo the Pulitzer Prize the following year in 1971. Neil Young wrote a hit song about it, performed by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Now, how about the Orangeburg Massacre? This was 2 years earlier, February 1968. Students from South Carolina State University were protesting segregation at local businesses. The National Guard and state police showed up and fired into the crowd and killed 3 students. This is 2 years before Kent State. Relatively few people have heard of the Orangeburg Massacre, and this could be why. Even the ways that this event would be reported in local newspapers were very skewed. The Charleston Evening Post called it a college melee on the front page, claimed that the group fired on police. If you can see that in the middle of this page. Subsequent investigations revealed that was entirely false. No protesters shot at police or soldiers.
Let's talk about William Cody for a minute. Hero of Western Americana, known by the nickname Buffalo Bill. I am distantly related to this man, apparently. There's a bit of resemblance to my dad. I can kind of see my dad's nose right there. I didn't know if it was true or not, if I was related to him, until very recently. My sister sent me some documents that she got from our grandma. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me that we were related to Buffalo Bill, like a great uncle. And it's something that I would tell proudly to my friends or to my teachers about my lineage. All the while, bless my little heart, knowing absolutely nothing, not knowing that, quote, Buffalo Bill made his name as a so-called Indian fighter, and his fortune with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, a show that used Native Americans to play the villainous foils in a sanitized, ahistorical version of their conquest, unquote. He first rose to fame after an incident of scalping that he would continuously replay for audiences, and in very early film. This is something that I need to reckon with. I now know this about my past. I'll be examining this for myself and for my children. And self-examination is on the road to allyship. But wait, there's more. This is something that I have in my possession. This belonged to my maternal grandfather, who was a member of the Nazi Party and fought for the Nazis in the war. Um, here's how this came to end. I should say the ideas of Nazism in my particular family. Over German cake and coffee when I was 10 or 12, there was a heated discussion between my mom and her aunt, so my great aunt. And my great aunt said something like, things were better when Adolf was in charge. And my mom, who is a saint and a kitten, she's on here right now. Hi, Mom. She ripped my great aunt a brand new you know what. And while we were sitting there, laid into her about the disgusting legacy of the Nazi Party and how dare she say something like that, etc. And that's where the lineage broke. And that's the kind of stand up and reckon power that it takes to confront white supremacy. Well done, Mom. And by the way, Germany does not F around with this kind of thing. Even 90 years later, reckoning comes. You think Germany would let off an Auschwitz guard because they were afraid of cancel culture? No, sir. But the truth is, campers, the Nazis got their ideas about eugenics from America. That's something else that we as Americans need to know and reckon with. And the point here is, if you intend to engage in allyship, start with yourself and your background and your intentions. While we're engaged in Sonder, remember yourself. As opposed to being outraged on behalf of people of color, you can deconstruct your own assumptions about what they need and start making education and action a priority, which leads me to my final thought tonight, because we're getting late. My favorite reaction that I get for the Remembrance Project is, what about X? What about this or that social justice issue or marginalized population? Why don't you honor these people or that injustice with a painting? And the answer that I always give is, why don't you? I fully encourage everyone to create art as activism. This is not the oppression Olympics. I'm not an activist or ally in any one social justice regard, at the complete disregard of other issues. The people who want to claim that one social justice is more deserving than the other, they need to reevaluate what their own activism looks like. You can be passionate about a cause, but if you're passionate about something to a degree that you question people's passions about other causes, then what you're really doing is nothing. So I'm going to leave it with a call to action. I show up for activism with my art because it's a tool that I have, and that might not be a tool that you have or are comfortable with. And that's okay. There's always ways to show up for allyship and activism. I have a friend who, I found out yesterday, leaves weekly voicemails at the office of Senator Mitch McConnell, oftentimes laden with euphemisms and swear words. You can write a letter, you can engage in the democratic process. The point is, don't do nothing. So seek it out and educate yourself. And as Maya Angelou says, when you know better, then you can do better. I have a ton of people to thank, the business leaders of Vashon or business owners of Vashon who allowed these portraits to be hung up, the people who connected me with those people, and Jessica and Paula and my wife and my son. And also, I really want to thank the Vashon Heritage Museum for having me on tonight. This has been a journey in the last 9 months to put the Vashon Remembrance Project together. If you guys want to see the paintings, they're up at the Vashon Center for the Arts right now. The installation should go throughout the month. And thank you to everybody for logging in today. And that's going to be pretty much it from West McLean tonight. I'll hand it back over.
Thank you, West. We do have some questions. That was a very powerful presentation. Thank you very, very much. One question is, so what do you see as the future of the Remembrance Project 2, 3, 5 years from now?
That is a good question. I have been talking to people on the island, the school district, about hooking up with the Puyallup tribe and doing a mural honoring the Puyallup tribe at the school, and then doing some sort of sharing between the students of the school districts, and that should come around in the spring. Later on in the summer, we're going to do a project for the Japanese Remembrance Project, honoring the people who were interred during the war. So I don't really have a great answer for what's going to happen in 2 or 4 years. I can barely plan 6 months out, but I am going to keep painting. I am going to keep putting up portraits of people, and I hope that they catch people's eyes, and individuals who have been martyred or sacrificed their lives can be remembered.
Mhm. Yeah, well, they sure have caught all of our eyes. So on that note, can we do to help you continue and further your work on Vashon and in the region, in the nation, around the world?
I don't I don't mean this the way it sounds, but I don't want to be helped myself. I want activism to spread. So I want people to help themselves be activists. So if you want to reach out to me, and you can go to vashonremembers.org, and you can reach out to me that way, and we can talk about ways that you might want to get involved in activism, or some of my favorite books or something like that. What would make me really happy is if I inspired anyone to paint their own portraits, or attend a march, or write some letters, or undertake their own activism. That's what would help my soul the most.
Okay, great.
West,
So,
I have another one here.
okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you wanted to do with the coffee roastery as an educational project?
Oh yeah. For those that don't know, the roastery, which is a small coffee shop here on the island, I painted a portrait of Rosa Parks that went up in the roastery, and along with all the other portraits, this one had a QR code attached to it. And that QR code actually, as opposed to going to the website where you read about Rosa Parks, I coordinated some island kids, and also my nephew to read a script about the life of Rosa Parks, and that entire script was compiled. I should say they read it and they were recorded. The audio was recorded, and that was compiled together and put into like a little montage of Rosa Parks' life and her contributions. That was kind of kid friendly and aimed at the younger generation to learn about Rosa Parks. And I was hoping that the fact that there were Vashon kids on there, or in the case of my nephew, he's out east, that it would get people, get kids specifically, really interested, and put it, develop it in a fun way that kids would easily gravitate to and want to go and check out and want to view multiple times, as opposed to, a textbook or something. So that's still up at the roastery. I didn't know that it would be up this long. I don't think they're going to take it down. But I hope it stays up. It's still there. The QR code can still be scanned. And yeah, you can listen to some kiddos tell you about Rosa Parks.
Great. Here's another question. How do we know when we are othering? What should we do when we witness those around us othering?
Speak up. I mean, you have to call it out. Something that it just occurred to me that there was a piece that I wanted to put in this presentation that I completely forgot. It just came back to me. And it was a short video on the the three rules of being an ally. And you'll have to pardon my French. Rule number 1 was don't be an asshole. Rule number 2 was don't raise assholes. And rule number 3 was call out assholes. I'm sorry about that, Elsa. I can see your face cringing a little bit right now. But these, those are the 3 rules. So you have to call it out when you see it, and it's very likely that you know it when you see it. And I can definitely understand the impulse to not want to get in other people's business, but it's so important to do it. Because it's going to teach somebody. And not only is it going to teach somebody that it's not okay, it's going to teach the person being othered that somebody has their back. So calling it out is the best thing that you can do. And I want to reiterate that I read books, so I'm not the expert on this. The people that write the books are. So you can definitely read more into this. I really love Dr. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, or White Supremacy and Me is also a great book. There's a ton out there, and I'm happy to recommend a few.
Right.
Thank you, Wes. I do have another question. What is the best way to respond when someone victim blames? What ways do we get others to see that they are victim blaming?
That's a good question. And it comes with educating yourself about the topic that's being spoken. The thing that comes to mind for me is, and I spoke about it a little bit, the idea of black on black crime. When I was putting up these paintings the first time, someone came up and said, I really love what you're doing, but I wish, the problem of black on black crime is still out there. So what are we going to do about that? And if I were to spout out some facts at them, it's probably not going to change somebody's mind. There is a white ally toolkit that I can link to. I'll link to it on the website. It's called the White Ally Toolkit, and it talks about how to disarm people based on the attacks that they're making on various groups of people, or racial attacks or something like that. And it's really interesting. It says that people are generally not swayed by statistics or facts, for that matter. They are swayed by storytelling. So if you know the story that you're trying to defend, all the better. And I definitely recommend checking out that White Ally Toolkit. And the idea, it's actually, I learned about it on a podcast. So if you Google White Ally Toolkit, you might find that podcast episode. And the fact that storytelling is the thing that most effectively shuts down the misinformation that's intrinsic to victim blaming.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. So this is a very important question to me. Thinking of all of our exhibits and our permanent exhibit that we'll be producing soon. How can the Heritage Museum ensure that we tell complete stories and not be revisionists?
Oh, that is that's a great question. I think you need to make sure that the people who are being reported on have a say. If it's if there, just as an example, if there's an exhibit on the Puyallup tribe, they have to be involved. If there's an exhibit on Black Lives Matter, people of color need to be involved. Black people need to be involved. So making sure that representation is there when these from the get-go, while these exhibits are being built, while the content is being written, while it's being installed, having representation of the individuals and source material, of course. I'm not a historian, but obviously source material. But representation is going to be my answer to that.
Yep, that's what we're working to do always. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, Wes, I have a lot of thank yous in the chat room. I don't know if you can see them, but people really are It's beautiful, it's storytelling, it's elegant are some of the words I've used to describe, characterize this. And one question is, will this video recording be available to share? And I think maybe that would go to Elsa.
Yes, it will. Give us until next week and we will have it online on the website,
Excellent.
available for everybody, and it'll stay up for years to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Support Black artists. Thanks, Ralph Rain, for letting me lease some of those amazing beats. And thank you, the Heritage Museum. Thank you, Elsa and Chris and Bruce. I really appreciate you having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. On behalf of the board of the Heritage Museum, we really appreciate your giving this talk, and thank you very much. And we'll say good night to everyone. Be safe from COVID and snow, stay warm, and take care.
I will to war, but for sure it's time to run. DC, but way past the blasting and guns and eagle. Trying to reach the stars with heart beside, but a feeder.